Dukkha. No, I'm not cursing. Dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A, as it's often translated. It depends on the language, but it's one of the terms we encounter in the Four Noble Truths, the very early teachings of Shakyamuni. Yeah, there's a lot of different meanings across the internet on dukkha, and that's because these traditions of ancient early teachings, translations from whether you call it Hinayana or the Agama Sutras or the Theravada or Mahayana, early Mahayana, blah, blah, blah. As you know, Shakyamuni taught for 50 years or so. And his teaching was taught much like all education still is to this day. It begins with core premises, and then it evolves, and some of those early terms, they change over time as they slough off some of the early explanations that are no longer necessary because the thinking has evolved to understand concepts more profoundly, right? So, and I just thought of two terms that I don't have in the book yet that I need to add, is the Kaidan and Butsudan. You may know that those two are almost interchangeable, but I'll add them in the book because we do come across them. Anyway, today's topic is Dukkha. Namu Myo Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for your support at all levels. Whether you just take a moment to like and subscribe, which is a bodhisattva act because it helps the algorithms make this Sangha grow. And a lot of you have recently done that, so thank you, thank you, thank you. Or whether you buy ebooks off of threefoldlotus.com or print books off of Lulu, or just those of you who are patrons, who are just doing monthly donations, whether it's $1 or $2, it all adds up, and it's very, very appreciated as well as necessary to keep this effort going. So whether it's on Patreon or PayPal, thank you so much. All right, Dukkha. From the online Encyclopedia of Buddhism, yes, there is an online Encyclopedia of Buddhism. The first meaning I have here is from Sanskrit, dukkha, which is spelled D-U-H-K-H-A, from Pali, dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A, so on and so forth. You can read that kind of stuff. Is translated, and again, translations are words of a different culture, in this case, English, Western English, which try to approximate the word, right? Which is why we have this Sangha, this is why we have these discussions, because words, they're approximations of experience and thought. So we talk them out so we can get more granular and more nuanced in our own insights of what something is actually, the meaning of the teaching, yeah? So here's some translations according to the Encyclopedia of Buddhism. Suffering, we hear that all the time. Anxiety, we don't hear that as much, but it's actually much more utilized in the earlier translations. I think it's more accurate, actually. Stress, in addition to it, and you hear me use these words all the time. Suffering is kind of a weird, huge umbrella term, and sometimes it's misleading. So anxiety, stress, yeah, that's more mental. Suffering can be, I stubbed my toe, right? So what part of the stubbed toe is mental and what part is physical? See, those things, they start to, and that's not inappropriate. It's just for our teaching purposes, our self-teaching purposes, sometimes it's a little confusing. Unsatisfactoriness. Now that sounds like it's probably closer to the real when Shakyamuni taught in Prakrit, which was the language he used to teach. Sorry for all of those who think Pali is the only ancient language. Prakrit was the language of the people, and Shakyamuni taught that wherever the teachings go, they should be taught in the language of that region, because that's what people understand. That's how they gain their insights. So you see, right from the get-go, Shakyamuni was like, language is just a vehicle to express meaning. Look for the meaning. Don't get hung up on the language, right? So, odd thing to say as we're talking about Buddhism reference, but that's why I called it a reference, not a dictionary, because I'm not interested in banging you over the head with what a word means or what a word is defined as, but more actually about the meaning to help concisely, because the king of concise here, just to guide your own understandings for your own insights, yeah? So dukkha, let's just go on here. It's one of the most important concepts in Buddhism. According to tradition, the Buddha has said, quote, I have taught one thing and one thing only, dukkha and the cessation of dukkha. And we talked about cessation already, yeah? The classic formulation of these teachings on dukkha is the doctrine of the Four Noble Truths, in which the truth of dukkha is identified as the first of the Four Noble Truths. Right? Why? Because he's defining samsara. He's defining that mind. And while I'm on the subject, I had a wonderful email that I responded to. I think it's an odd thing. We get wrapped up in talking about the talk about Buddhism, talking about the talk. But as an overarching understanding of Buddhism, understand that Buddhism doesn't negate samsara, doesn't negate life. It doesn't negate that I'm a me and you are a you. Right? Some people start to think that, well, Buddhism says everything is an illusion and a delusion, and therefore we don't really exist. We're phantoms. But that's not what Buddhism says at all. Buddhism does not negate samsaric physical form and life or identity. What Buddhism wants to locate is where the this and thatness of physical reality is interpreted by our minds, because Buddhism is about the mind. Never forget that. Buddhism says if you allow your mind to behave like monkeys, just constantly getting your attention about the physicality of life, what instantly happens is that the physicality of life becomes what you consider to be life. So then you become your possessions. Your possessions identify who you are. Right? Isn't that the normal play of human beings? How many times have you heard you are your job? Your job defines you. The car you drive defines you. How much money you have defines you. The relationships you're in define, right? Everything we define identity as in samsara is based on possessions. And the better or more possessions we have, the bigger our ego. And we're never satisfied. We always want more. Well, that's dukkha. Do you see? So Buddhism says, you know what? You can have all this stuff, but you need to make your mind, you need to shift your mind over just a little bit to perceive all of this as not substantial, as not who you are. That's why it's called self-realization, because the self that we realize by chanting, by opening our Gohonzon mind, isn't stuff, right? Where's your mind? Can you grab it? Oh, it's chemical reactions in the brain. Sure, there's chemical reactions in the brain. But what emerges from that complex system of neurons and all of the brain stuff, the neurology, is something other. This consciousness is not chemical. It arises from all of that physical wonder. But our minds are sentience. It's an observer of all these processes. That's what the incredible opportunity of this human life is. This ability to objectively witness this process. And by just shifting gears a little bit and being outside the body, as it were, and I've identified the body as not just this, but the universe itself, because we're all the same stuff. See, that's an important step. By being an observer, we detach ourselves from the obsessions, from the ownership, from the possessions, from the ego, from dukkha. That's the cessation of dukkha, not the annihilation of reality. The cessation of dukkha is the attachment to the very aspect of reality from which we experience as anxiety, stress. Why do we have anxiety and stress? Because we worry about what we possess or don't possess, right? So you see, the Buddhism is that shift in the mind. Yeah. Dukkha, second definition, is commonly explained according to three different categories. And I need to redo that because that didn't come out right. The obvious physical and mental suffering associated with birth, growing old, illness, and dying, right? Those are the old stories of the beginnings of Siddhartha's quest for finding something to alleviate dukkha, or suffering, as it were, right? The sufferings being birth, growing old, suffering, dying, right? Suffering is only one of the components here, not all of it, right? Because dukkha is all of those different aspects of stress and anxiety. Who would say birth isn't stressful, right? Also, the anxiety or stress of trying to hold on to things that are constantly changing, right? We talk about this all the time. Nothing is static. Everything's in momentum, right? A basic unsatisfactoriness pervading all forms of existence, because all forms of life are non-static. They're changing, impermanent, and without any inner core or substance, right? There's no atom of Buick, right? Things don't just appear. They're formulated, constructed from energies into forms, into relationships of various forms, right? All the way to the complexity of the human brain. Everything is extant in that way, moment to moment. It's amazing, and it's hard to conceive of. Especially when all we're doing is busy collecting stuff as though it was permanent, right? But it isn't. It's going to wear out, right? We have so many terms for the decay of stuff. We know nothing is permanent, but we act as though it is because we build our pedestal of selfdom on top of it. The Buddhist tradition emphasizes the importance of developing insight into the nature of dukkha, the conditions that cause it, and how it can be overcome. This process is formulated in the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, right? But they're very staccato. There's dukkha. Dukkha comes of cravings. How do you get rid of dukkha? Cease the cravings. How do you cease the cravings? We got to live an appropriate life. You've got to adjust your thinking. You've got to think differently about the way you navigate the world, the coursing of the world, the coursing of the physical world. You see, there's no denying of the physical world in Buddhism, but people somehow get confused and they make that leap. Don't do that. It's not about the physical world. It's about how we experience it, how we think about it, the mind. Now, Britannica, it talks about it a little differently. In Britannica, the encyclopedia people, they say dukkha is Pali for sorrow or suffering. A little different. They're more emotional about it, yeah? Sanskrit dukkha, in Buddhist thought, the true nature of all existence. Much Buddhist doctrine is based on the fact of suffering. Its reality, its cause, and means of suppression formed the subject of the Buddha's first sermon, see the Four Noble Truths, recognition of the fact of suffering as one of the three basic characteristics of existence, along with impermanence and the absence of a self. Continues the right knowledge. Yeah, that's in the Noble Eightfold Path. Three types of suffering are distinguished. They result respectively from pain, such as old age, sickness, and death, from pleasure changing to pain, and from the fact that, because of impermanence, beings are susceptible to pain in the next moment. Okay, so that's Britannica. It's kind of leaping around with not a lot of granularity, and reading that definition, I could see why a lot of people are confused, yeah? So here I go. For our modern practice of Shakyamuni's ultimate teaching of the Lotus Sutra, that the teachings of early Buddhism are more focused on the samsaric mental experience of students or monks, whereas the more deeply explored teachings of Mahayana dig into the nature of the formations of those experiences to their origins. That makes sense? Consequently, many terms of early Buddhist texts either ceased to be relevant or more often simply became much more profoundly considered in their meaning, which is what I said at the start of this, right? For dukkha, the later transliterations and translations of Mahayana texts move away from dukkha and nidana, although they're still valid concepts to get you on the road to understanding, and more focused on the mind and its vicissitudes, because that's where all of this is happening, in the mind, yes? The areas of the consciousnesses and our ability to transmigrate from one frame of reference to another, right, from samsara to Buddha-ness, the development of the life of propagation and our level of awakening, and so on. Right, now we're getting into the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, yes? Dukkha is still a useful term, though, if it is viewed through the lens of Mahayana terminology. See identification, and we'll get to that here as we go through the alphabet, yeah? To grasp fully the inertial formations that constitute one's experience of dukkha can be very revealing to the student of Buddhism. Now, that's where I ended this this entry in the book. I feel almost like I need to be a little bit more specific, maybe give an example. So I'm going to extend this a little bit. I don't want to get too wordy, though, because already we have quite a lot to consider. And I think, do you, from this entry, get a good idea of what dukkha means? What do you think? Should I add something else? I normally do. Don't know if the synopsis that I put in here actually makes it more clear. I think I need to add a paragraph. Talk about it a little bit more. I'm going to think on that. In the meantime, if you have any ideas, please let me know in the comments or email me directly at tlksylvain@gmail. Yeah. I read all of your comments and emails. So far, our Sangha is not so, it's not that our Sangha isn't so huge. It keeps growing, so thank you for that. But the amount of emails and comments, quite honestly, are easily, I'm easily able to read them all and consider them. And so please don't shy away, okay? It's all helpful. And in the meantime, keep your practice strong. Right? I've considered putting a copy of this up on the website as I'm working on it, but I kind of think, like today, I thought of a couple more words. I want it to be closer to a finished form, so that way I don't create confusion. So I understand some of you can't wait to get a hold of the whole book. We'll get there. I'm going to cover every term in these videos, so those of you who like to listen to podcasts and have issues with reading, whether it's electronic or print, then you'll have an audio version, right? With, albeit, more dialogue from me, but still, these are shorter videos, so I hope that's useful for you. In the meantime, take care of your health, keep your practice strong, be kind, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Bye for now.